I've titled this message, The Making of a King. So we're seeing the transition of going from a theocracy to a monarchy in the nation of Israel. And none of this is without God's purview. And so obviously the best position for us to be in is to be under the complete authority of God, to be in fellowship with Him, having Him operate as the driving force in our life, and the decisions that we make, and the way that we conduct ourselves. This is the ideal. It began in the very beginning. We said that God created man, and it said He created him from the dust of the earth. And the thing that He did with him, it occurs to me, and I've told you this before, because it was later in life that it occurred to me, that the position of man with God at that time was in a perfect environment of beautiful surroundings. And the habit of God at that time was to walk in the evening in the garden with Adam. And I don't think that that has changed, that He still desires that each of us on an individual basis would have a relationship with Him that is open and communicative and is pleasant and is peaceful. So that is the best position of man. The highest and best use of our lives is to worship God. That's when we're at our very best. That's when peace reigns, both within our hearts and among us, is when we are in a right relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ, and we are holding Him at the highest level, and we are praising Him with the words of our mouths, with the songs of our hearts, with the prayers that are lifted up and become the incense of heaven for all eternity. So this is kind of the relationship. And so it starts out this way, and then He gathers to Himself this one people out of all the peoples of the world, because we recognize that it's in our hearts from the very beginning to fall and to be sinful and to be separated from God. And so after all that's gone on, and finally gets to a point that is so bad, and we look around at the conditions that we are in this world today, and we think, my goodness, how can it get any lower? Just about the time you think it's hit bottom, then it goes down another step. Well, it has been lower at times. We're not unique. We're not something special in the timeline, the flow of time over the eons. It got so bad at one final point that God said, you know what, I'm almost sorry that I did this. And He said, I'm going to pare it down to just a few people. And He narrowed it down by the grace of God. Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. And he constructed the ark, and God changed the whole earth. And we know geologically, and if you pay any attention to really people who study these things and the science that's involved, the science really points to the fact that the earth is very young. We are not billions and billions of years old, and this didn't take a long time. In fact, it all happens like that. And that's why scientists are always perplexed. You ever hear, whenever you say, scientists are surprised, experts are surprised. You go, why are they called experts then? You know? And so they're surprised. They see things appear in the geological record. Why, this just appeared suddenly. Why, that's strange. And they say, well, it had to come from something else. And then they spin this big story about how one thing comes from another. And of course, at this stage of history, we know from genetics that that's just not possible. You know, so you're talking about something that is just not possible. So why do you keep talking about it? And so they say, well, obviously this came from that and the other thing and down the line. And the truth of the matter is that it all appeared very suddenly. God starts all over. He changed the earth drastically at that time. And man comes out, proliferates, is dispersed. He gathers to himself a particular people, Abraham and his clan and all that, and decides this is how He's going to reveal Himself through us, is through this group of people. And it extends even to the present day. And so as we are following the timeline and the history of the Jewish people, the land of Israel, that we are seeing God interacting with us, and it's a picture of how He interacts with us personally today, several thousand years later. Everything stands as a picture, an allegory, as a way of us to understand how things fit together and how to make sense of this crazy life that we live. And so he's gone through this whole time. They've operated as a theocracy, but he knows something else is coming down the pike. And we've gone through all the judges, people that he raised up to bring everybody back into order, because our tendency is to fall away. And then a judge would arise and the people would get right with God and things would be made good and it would be nice for a few years, and then everybody forgets and just goes about their way. And how easy it is. I think in just the last 2 years, this disruption that we've had to the normalcy of our way of living. And so many people have fallen away. They just get out of the habit. Oh, the church was closed. Our church didn't close. But a lot of churches here in town did close. Some are still closed. They're just gone. And people just get out of the habit. Oh, it's just easier. We'll do something else on Sunday. And God takes a back seat. How easy that is. And we need to be brought back. When finally the people get to a point where we're down to the last judge and people are rejecting him. And he's resistant to this. And he has warned the people, if you'll recall from my last message, where he told them, you get yourself a king and this is what's going to happen to you. And he keeps warning them that this is what's going to happen to him. But God has communicated to Samuel and says, Samuel, they're not rejecting you, they are rejecting me. So don't take it personally. Let's give them what they want, and we'll see how it goes. And so today, we are dealing with the making of a king, chapters 9, 10, and 11 of the book of 1 Samuel. You know, the first one that is chosen here, we're going to be talking about Saul, King Saul. And his reign was about 40 years. And so here we are at the beginning of the year. He's of the reign. He is a young man. I was reading I Googled this. I was wondering, how much money do we spend on cosmetics? It says in 2020, the average annual expenditure on cosmetics, perfume, and bath preparation products amounted to approximately $199 per consumer unit in the United States. Now, I don't know if that was just birthing units or if that included some of the soy men also. So this figure represents the highest expenditure in over a decade. So for all the people out there who are buying cosmetics of whatever kind, they're spending approximately $200 a year for that. It amounts to billions and billions and billions of dollars. It's a big business. If you want to get rich, just come up with some kind of a funny formula that people can smear on their face, make some promises, and no lie, you will get rich beyond your wildest imagination. So bear that in mind. So in chapter 9 we begin, there was a man of Benjamin whose name was Kish, the son of Abiel, the son of Zeror, the son of Bechorath, the son of Aphiah, a Benjamite, a mighty man of power. Verse 2 is key, and he had a son whose name was Saul, a choice young man, a goodly, and there was not among the children of Israel a goodlier person than he. From his shoulders and upward he was higher than any of the people. So he was, as you looked at him in a crowd, he was taller than Mike here. All of us look up to Mike, but Mike would be looking up to Saul. And he was obviously handsome, certainly as handsome as Mike. So he was a sight to behold. He was in the flower of youth. He was a young man, big and bulky, and really buff. And so he was pleasant. But you know what? Saul was, this is kind of the basic material that we start with. Saul is actually a young man who is pretty well clueless. He's a pretty face who doesn't know what he's doing, but he looks really good doing it. And we've all seen this happen. He's someone who hasn't really paid attention in his youth. These kind of things are just kind of happening, and he's really not connecting the dots at this point. And so a problem arises, and Saul doesn't have a clue how to take care of this problem. The problem is, it says, the asses of Kish, Saul's father, were lost. And Kish said to Saul, his son, "Take now one of the servants with thee, and arise and go seek the asses." And he passed through Mount Ephraim, and he passed through the land of Shalishah, and they found them not. And they passed through the land of Shalim, and they were not. And they passed through the land of the Benjamites, and they found them not. Now he's grown up on the farm, and yet he has no idea if the donkeys got out, where would they go? And usually somebody who's a farmer, you just kind of have a sense. You know, if your cattle break through the fence, you kind of have an idea of the lay of the land, where they're going to go. And he hasn't got a clue. And so he sends them out to find them, and they're not having any luck, and they're going quite a way. We've gone through over through Mount Ephraim, through Shalishah, through Shalim, and they're into the land of the Benjamites. And when they were come to the land of Zuph, Saul said to his servant that was with him, "Come, let us return, lest my father leave caring for the asses and take thought for us." And the servant, who is obviously somewhat more connected than Saul is, and he said unto him, "Behold now, there is in this city a man of God, and he is an honorable man, and all that he saith cometh surely to pass. Now let us go thither, peradventure he can show us our way that we should go." And then said Saul to his servant, "But behold, if we go, what shall we bring the man?" So first of all, Saul, he has no idea who Samuel is. He hasn't been paying attention, and everybody in the whole nation knows who Samuel is. It reminds me of some of the videos I've seen where they go down on the beach, Venice Beach, down in Southern California, and you ask somebody, "Do you know who the President of the United States is right now?" No, can you give me a hint? You know, you think, how clueless can you be? "Sir, do you know what we celebrate on the 4th of July? I don't know. "Who did we get our independence from? Greece?" You know, you wonder, do these people have actually gone to school? But they have paid absolutely no attention to anything that's going on as they're growing up. And that's the kind of person that Saul was. He was just unaware. And he's unprepared. So even though he doesn't know who Samuel is, he says, well, we need to be able to give him something. And by George, my pockets are empty. What? You came on a trip and you didn't put any traveling cash? And he didn't do it. And he says, the servant answers Saul again. He says, "Behold, I have here at hand the 4th part of a shekel of silver. That will I give to the man of God to tell us our way." And then Samuel, who's writing this narrative here, he makes an aside and explains to us, because they had the same thing going on in their time that goes on in our time. Words change their meaning. And so he says, and how we refer to things. And so he says, "Before time in Israel, when a man went to inquire of God, thus he spake, Come, and let us go to the seer. For that is now called a prophet, was before time called a seer." So now we call them prophets. Back then, called them seers. And even now, our idea of a prophet might be a little bit different than what a prophet was back in those days. Prophets, in fact, the way the word is going to be used here in the context of this narrative, a prophet is someone who speaks by inspiration. It may be the telling of the truth of the future, but it can also be just an exaltation of God in singing and in speech by inspiration. And it inspires those that are all around. And so then Saul said to his servant, "Well said, well said. You've got the money, you've got the idea. Come, let us go." And so they went up to the city where the man of God was. And then comes a little spot in the scripture that I kind of like. Everything happens at the water cooler. And that's kind of the way it is here. They come into the town, and it says, "And they went up the hill to the city. They found young maidens going out to draw water. And they said to them, 'Is the seer here?' And they answered them and said, 'He is. Behold, he is before you. Make haste now, for he came today to the city. For there is a sacrifice of the people today in the high place, and as soon as ye be come into the city, ye shall straightway find him before you go up to the high place to eat. For the people will not eat until he come, because he doth bless the sacrifice, and afterward they eat that is bidden. Just got to go to the young maidens that are at the well. I like stories about maidens at the well. In fact, we all like stories. We all like romance stories. My beloved loves romance stories, so we find ourselves on any given evening, we're watching some chick flick. And it's always fun. We like our own romance stories. You know, it's always interesting how you just happen to be here and go there and meet here, and it all comes together, and life is wonderful. And so we have all of those. And some of the ones that I like that are favorites of mine, one is in Genesis 24, verses 13 through 17. And you might know in this story, the servant is being sent by Abram to find a wife for Isaac. And so he's looking, and he doesn't know who he's looking for, and it turns out it's Rebekah. And so the servant, he gets to where he's going to go. He comes to the well. And he says, "Behold, I stand here by the well of water, and the daughters of men of the city come out to draw water. And let it come to pass that the damsel to whom I shall say, Let down thy pitcher, I pray thee, that I may drink. And she shall say, Drink, and I will give thy camels drink also. Let the same be she that thou hast appointed for thy servant Isaac." Ooh, now that's a very intricate prayer. And you know, sometimes it's very appropriate for us to go to God with a very distinct inquiry or set of facts. And I have experienced this. Gwen and I have experienced this, where it was very exact to a particular timetable, and we asked for just definite knowledge, and God came through right on the dot. And therefore, we knew this is what we're supposed to do. And sure enough, when we look back on that time in our lives, it was exactly the very thing that we were supposed to do. And it worked out wonderfully. And I probably don't have time to tell you the whole story, but that's what we've got going on here. This servant is asking something very, very particular. And it's a big thing that he's asking him to do, because we don't have much contact with camels. The camel is a horse put together by a committee. And the camel is a very, very unique animal, designed specifically by God for the environment in which he finds himself. Capable to go for days, can go a whole month without taking a drink of water in a barren land. Remember reading about a race that was done between camels and horses. The fine Arabian stallion, they had to go 100 miles. And they raced. And by George, the horse won by just a few minutes and then dropped dead. The camel came, drank his fill, and then ran back the 100 miles. That's what kind of a wonderful animal this is. And a camel going without water, he can put his snout in the trough, and he can consume in 3 minutes 53 gallons of water. So if you're asking some damsel to go to the well and draw enough water for me and for my camels, you're asking a big thing. And the damsel has got to know, if she's gotten to the age where she's carrying the water, that you don't offer to feed the camels, give the camels drink. Let the guys take care of that, because it's going to be a couple hours, and it's going to be a lot of work. And it says, "Thy servant, and thereby shall I know that thou hast showed kindness unto my master. And it came to pass, before he had done speaking, that behold, Rebekah came out, who was born to Bethuel, son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, with her pitcher upon her shoulder." She's coming, you can just see the picture. You know, the women, they wear the long flowing gowns like this, you know, and you can see everything just swaying just right, you know, as she comes. And she's just the vision of beauty. And every guy in this room who has a wife remembers this. When you saw that vision of beauty with the pitcher of water on her shoulder. And she comes to the well, and the servant ran to meet her and said, "Let me, I pray thee, drink a little water of thy pitcher." And she said, "Drink, my lord." And she hasted and let down her pitcher upon her hand and gave him drink. And when she had done giving him drink, she said, "I will draw water for thy camels also." And we know the story of Isaac and Rebekah. And their two sons, Jacob and Esau. And it's not but a generation later, in Genesis 29, verses 9 through 12, that Jacob finds himself at the well. And while he yet spake with them, he's talking to the guys around the well, and he's speaking with them. And while he's still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she kept them. And it came to pass when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near, and he rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and he watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. And Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's brother and that he was Rebekah's son. And she ran and she told her father. And the rest is history. We know that Jacob was just smitten with this young lady. And so he went into business with Laban in order to gain her hand. Laban said, "Well, you'll have to work for it. You're going to have to labor for 7 years." And so he labored that 7 years, and to him it was but a day. It just flew by, and he did the work. And so when he woke up the next morning, he discovered that he had married Leah, not Rachel. Laban said, "Well, it's not right that the older daughter not get married first. So that's just the way it had to be." And Jacob said, "No, that's not the way it's supposed to be." And so he worked another 7 years to get Rachel. And then he worked another, I think, 6 years in order to get his household together so that he could leave. And when it came time to leave, he left a very wealthy man, because the deal was that he made with Laban. He says, "Well, all the sheep and cattle that have spots and blemishes on their hide, those are the ones I'll take." And Laban looks out over the fields, and he sees all these perfect sheep. He says, "Yeah, that sounds like a good deal to me." Well, at the end of the 6 years, through selective breeding, Jacob went away with all the sheep. And Laban wasn't happy about that. And of course, Rachel took the household gods, which they shouldn't have had. And of course, they chase out and they have a big meeting. And we're going to hear about that a little bit later at an area called Mizpah. And it comes up in this story. Some of these things just all keep happening in the same area. And so another meeting at the well is in Exodus 2, verses 15 through 22. And it says, "Now when Pharaoh heard this thing, he heard that Moses had just killed an Egyptian." Moses came out there, saw this Egyptian whipping one of his brothers, and he says, "You're not going to do that." And he killed the guy on the spot and buried him in the sand. And he thought he had done it on the sly and nobody would have seen it. But of course, everybody knew about it. And when Pharaoh heard of this thing, he sought to slay Moses. But Moses fled from the face of Pharaoh. And he dwelt in the land of Midian, and he sat down by a well. Now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters, and they came and drew water and filled the troughs to water their father's flock. And the shepherds came and drove them away, but Moses stood up, and he helped them, and he watered their flock. And when they came to Reuel, their father, he said, "How is it that ye are come so soon today?" And they said, "An Egyptian delivered us out of the hand of the shepherds, and also drew water enough for us, and watered the flock." And he said unto his daughters, "And where is he? And why is it that ye have left the man? Call him, that he may eat bread." And Moses was content to dwell with the man. And he gave Moses Zipporah, his daughter, and she bare him a son, and he called his name Gershom. For I have been a stranger in a strange land. Gershom means stranger. So Moses found his wife at a well. Things happen around the water cooler. But the favorite well to me, the one that's the very best, is when the Lord Jesus Christ was going from the north part of the land, and they had to go down to the south part, and they had to go through the land of Samaria. And as you know the stories of the Good Samaritan and all that, that the Jews looked down upon the Samaritans because they had not kept a pure line, and they just weren't as good a people, and blah, blah, blah. And so they looked down their nose so much. There was so much racial tension, which should never have been. But there was so much of this tension that they would purposely go miles out of their way to go around Samaria rather than to go through Samaria. Jesus doesn't have that kind of animus. And so he goes through Samaria. And what did he do? He finds himself at the well at Sychar. And it said, and he, in John, the 4th chapter, the 4th through the 15th verses, it said, he must needs go through Samaria, then cometh he to a city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, and near to the parcel of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph. See, all this stuff they're all happening in the same area. Now Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, therefore, being wearied with his journey, sat thus on the well. And it was about the 6th hour, and there cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. And Jesus saith unto her, give me to drink. For his disciples were gone away unto the city to buy meat. And then saith the woman of Samaria unto him, how is it that thou, being a Jew, askest drink of me, which am a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. And Jesus answered and said unto her, if thou knewest the gift of God, and who it is that saith to thee, give me to drink, thou wouldest have asked of him, and he would have given thee living water. The woman saith unto him, sir, thou hast nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. From whence then hast thou that living water? Art thou greater than our father Jacob, which gave us the well, and drank thereof himself, and his children, and his cattle? Jesus answered and said unto her, whosoever drinketh of this water shall thirst again. But whosoever drinketh of the waters that I shall give him shall never thirst. But the water I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. Spring up, O well. I have a river of life flowing out of me. Spring up, O well. Spring up. And what I like is her answer, which can, in this day, 2,000 years later, be our reply. The woman saith unto him, sir, give me this water, that I thirst not. That's available to us, even in this day and age. We pick up the story. The guys are coming to town. The girls have told him where Samuel's going to be because there is going to be a sacrifice. And as you might know, God has gone before and has made all this known. So none of this is a surprise to the people who are involved except Saul. It says, now the Lord had told Samuel in his ear the day before Saul came, saying, tomorrow about this time I will send thee a man out of the land of Benjamin, and thou shalt anoint him to be captain over my people Israel, that he may save my people out of the hand of the Philistines, for I have looked upon my people, because their cry is come unto me. And when Samuel saw Saul, the Lord said unto him, behold, the man whom I spake to thee of, this same shall reign over my people. Then Saul drew near to Samuel in the gate and said, tell me, I pray thee, where the seer's house is. And Samuel answered Saul and said, I am the seer. Go up before me into the high place, for ye shall eat with me today, and tomorrow I will let thee go. And I will tell thee all that is in thine heart. And then he makes this statement, this is important. And as for thine asses that were lost 3 days ago, set not thy mind on them, for they are found. And on whom is all the desire of Israel? Is it not on thee and on thy father's house? Now that's an abrupt, startling thing to be said by a total stranger that you come up and meet. And Saul answered and said, am not I a Benjamite of the smallest of the tribes of Israel? And truly he speaks. He is the smallest of the tribe of Israel. Because you will remember just a few teachings ago, back in the 20th chapter of Judges, how a very bad thing happened in one of the cities of Benjamin. It was horrible. It was so bad that the entire tribes, all the other tribes, were inflamed against Benjamin, that they should do something so base and sinful and startling. And they determined that they would wipe them out. But they were sorry for that. They reduced them to where there was just a few hundred Benjamites left. And they had sworn an oath to each other that they wouldn't let them have any wives. And the solution that they came was for the men of Benjamin to go out there and kidnap wives when they came out for a festival or whatever. So you might remember some of that story. So Benjamin was reduced to really a very, very tiny group of people. And here's Saul, the least of the least. He's, of course, tall and handsome, but he doesn't see himself that way. In fact, most of the time, we don't ever see ourselves the way other people see us or how they perceive us to be, because we know in our heart of hearts our own cowardice, our own problems, our own failings, our own lack of confidence, all the things that Saul experiences here in his insecurities. And other people may think of us as towering, paragons of virtue and all that. And so we don't see ourselves that way. And that's the way Saul is. Am I not a Benjamite of the smallest of the tribes of Israel? And my family the least of all the families of the tribe of Benjamin? Wherefore then speakest thou so to me? And Samuel took Saul and his servant, and he brought them into the parlor, and he made them sit in the chiefest place among them that were bidden, which were about 30 persons. And Samuel said unto the cook, bring the portion which I gave thee. So he's already set aside the best portion of the meat, the shoulder of the sacrifice, and he wants him to partake of that. And the cook took up the shoulder and that which was upon it, and he set it before Saul. And Samuel said, behold, that which is left, set it before thee, and eat, for unto this time hath it been kept for thee, since I said, I have invited the people. So Saul did eat with Samuel that day. And when they came down from the high place into the city, Samuel communed with Saul upon the top of the house. They went up, everybody, they had patios on top of their houses. And he was up there. They had a very pleasant visit up there. And then they arose early, and it came to pass about the spring of the day, so it's early in the day, and Samuel called Saul to the top of the house, saying, up, that I may send thee away. And Saul arose, and they went out, the both of them, he and Samuel abroad. And as they were going down to the end of the city, Samuel said to Saul, bid the servants pass on before us. And he passed on, but stand thou still a while, that I may show thee the word of God. And so we reach chapter 10, which is the changing. We had the basic material. Now we see the changing of Saul. And in chapter 10, Samuel gives him 3 signs. It says, Samuel took a vial of oil and he poured it upon his head. When they anointed people, they really anointed people. We are such mamby-pambies. So when you have a chance, if you want to come up, someone will pray with you, will anoint with oil, and we put a little drop on your forehead. They didn't do it that way in those days. They'd pour it on their head, the nice olive oil, and they pour it on, let it run down, And in fact, it even talks about the oil running down on Aaron's head, down off his beard, dripping off his beard. And in that day and age, this was a very desirable thing. In this day and age, we would probably say, my goodness, you've stained my sweater. So in those days, they poured it on, and he poured it upon his head, and he kissed him, and he said, is it not because the Lord hath anointed thee to be captain over his inheritance? When thou art departed from me today, then thou shalt find 2 men by Rachel's sepulchre in the border of Benjamin and Zilzah. And they will say unto thee, the asses which thou wentst to seek are found. And lo, thy father hath left the care of the asses and sorroweth for you, saying, what shall I do for my son? He's already had this kind of word the day before. And now he's saying, this is what's going to happen. These guys are going to say this to you. Then thou shalt go on forward from thence, and thou shalt come to the plain of Tabor, and there you shall meet thee 3 men going up to God to Bethel. one carrying 3 kids, and another carrying 3 loaves of bread, and another carrying a bottle of wine, which would have been a bag. They called a skin bag a bottle. And they will salute thee and give thee 2 loaves of bread. The bread is intended to go to someone who has been anointed. It was probably intended for a priest. But in this case, Saul is the anointed one. Samuel has set him apart for a particular purpose. And so he will give you 2 loaves of bread, which thou shalt receive of their hands. After that, thou shalt come to the hill of God, where there is a garrison of the Philistines, and it shall come to pass that when thou art come thither to the city, that thou shalt meet a company of prophets coming down from the high place with a psaltery and a tablet and a pipe and a harp, and before them, and they shall prophesy. These would be people who would be singing under the inspiration of God, would be singing and worshiping and speaking his word. And the Spirit of the Lord will come upon thee, and thou shalt prophesy with them, and thou shalt be turned into another man. And let it be, when these signs are come unto thee, that thou do as occasion serve thee, for God is with thee. And thou shalt go down before me to Gilgal, and behold, I will come unto thee and offer burnt offerings, and to sacrifice sacrifices of peace offerings. 7 days shalt thou tarry till I come to thee, and show thee what thou shalt do. And, as you might surmise, the next verse says, and it was so. That when they had turned his back to go from Samuel, God gave him another heart, and all these signs came to pass that day. And when they came thither to the hill, behold, a company of prophets met him, and the Spirit of God came upon him, and he prophesied among them. He went with them. And it came to pass, when all that knew him before time saw that, behold, he prophesied among the prophets. Then the people said one to another, what is this that is come unto the son of Kish? Is Saul also among the prophets? And one of the same place answered and said, but who is their father? And therefore it became a proverb. Is Saul also become the prophet among the prophets? So we know something of Saul's character in his youth, that he was not given to the worship of God, that he was not someone who felt that connection with God. He was not someone who had made that connection that every one of us needs to make. Because now he is different. There is something in the way he conducts himself, in the way he talks, in the way he speaks to them that is different. And he is a changed man. Now you would think from all of this that he would have this real assurance in his heart and a boldness in going forth. But that is not the case. Saul's life is marked with insecurity, with a double heart. He's just got lots of problems. And we'll see it just a little bit later. When he had made an end of prophesying, he came to the high place, and Saul's uncle said unto him and to his servant, whither went thee? And he said, to seek the asses. And when we saw that they were nowhere, we came to Samuel. And Saul's uncle said, tell me, I pray thee, what Samuel said unto you. And Saul said unto his uncle, he told us plainly that the asses were found. How often are we like Saul? Yeah, we speak to the truth just to a certain extent. But we don't have the boldness of heart to be able to tell the rest of the story. Of what God had done in his heart and what he had experienced on the mountain and coming down, and how he'd had that closeness with God, and he had prophesied with all the other prophets, and he had praised God. He stopped just a little bit short of that. And but of the matter of the kingdom whereof Samuel spake, he told him not. And Samuel called the people together unto the Lord to Mizpah. Remember I mentioned Mizpah? That's where Jacob and Laban caught up to Jacob, and they made this, they kind of made a pact. They said that there was not going to be any hard feelings. Neither one of them would go past this point that they had erected at that point, a pile of stones that they had erected, and they called it Mizpah. And they said, I will not go past this with evil intent. We'll only go by if we're going to be good to one another. And I can remember, I grew up in the Christian church, and we were a part of a youth program that was established back in the late 1800s, and has now just kind of disappeared because, culture changes. And so I was part of Christian Endeavor, a wonderful organization that operated in many churches. It was non-denominational and went across many denominations. And I can remember many a time we would have our meeting and we would do whatever we were doing, and we'd all stand, we'd cross hands and hold our hands like this in a circle, and we would recite the Mizpah. May the Lord watch between me and thee while we are absent, one from the other. This we ask in Jesus' name, amen. And so we mean it in a slightly different way than it was for Jacob and Laban. But so here we are at Mizpah. And he said unto the children of Israel, thus saith the Lord God of Israel, I brought up Israel out of Egypt and delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of all kingdoms and of them that oppressed you. And ye have this day rejected your God, who himself saved you out of all your adversities and your tribulations. And you said unto him, Nay, but set a king over us. Now therefore present yourselves before the Lord by your tribes and by your thousands. And when Samuel had caused the tribes of Israel to come near, they all go marching by, the tribe of Benjamin was taken. And when he had caused the tribe of Benjamin to come near, and their families, and the family of Matri was taken, and Saul the son of Kish was taken. And when they sought him, they could not find him. He's hiding. He doesn't have that strength. The change. Saul, who was supposedly among the prophets, is hiding. You know that saying about is Saul among the prophets, it relates also into, 1,000 years later, or longer rather, when Jesus talked about that. In Matthew 13, 54 through 57, it says, and when he was come into his own country, he sought them in their synagogue, insomuch that they were astonished, and said, whence hath this man this wisdom and these mighty works? Why is Saul among the prophets? How is this? Who's his dad? What's his background? What's with this man? How can he speak with this wisdom and these mighty works? Is not this the carpenter's son, and is not his mother called Mary? And his brother James and Joseph and Simon and Judas and his sisters, are they not all with us? I guess that's kind of blows the Catholic view of Mary, that she was a virgin forever. And according to this, it looks to me like there were at least 7 kids, maybe more, because we don't know how many sisters. And whence hath this man all these things? And they were offended in him. But Jesus said unto them, a prophet is not without honor, save in his own country and in his own house. How true, how true. So sometimes we overlook that which we should be aware of. And they should have been aware of Saul and his calling. Saul should have been aware of it. And what's he doing? He's hiding. Where is he hiding? Excuse me. So he's hiding among the stuff. He had hid himself among the stuff. And they ran and they fetched him thence. And when he stood among the people, he was higher than any of the people from his shoulders and upward. And Samuel said unto all the people, see ye him whom the Lord hath chosen, that there is none like unto him in all this people. And all the people shouted and said, God save the king. Then Samuel told the people the manner of the kingdom. He told them again what they're going to have to put up with. And he wrote it in a book so that it was carved in stone now. And he laid it up before the Lord. And Samuel sent all the people away, every man to his house. And Saul went home to Gibeah. And there went with him a band of men whose hearts God had touched. But the children of Belial, these are worthless, no good for nothing individuals, people who are a waste of oxygen. See, so there are people like that. And I think we are aware of people like that. Even in our own community, there's people like that. And you can seek and all, but there's always going to be people like this. And they said, how shall this man save us? And they despised him, and they brought him no presents. But Saul, he did something big. It said he held his peace. He didn't react to it. He acted as if he hadn't heard it said. So he goes back to his house. And now we come to the 11th chapter. Then I call this Saul's one great accomplishment. And everything from here on out is downhill with Saul. It says, and Nahash the Ammonite came up, and he encamped against Jabesh Gilead. And all the people of Jabesh said unto Nahash, make a covenant with us, and we will serve thee. So the idea is make a covenant. What they would do is they'd take an animal, they'd cleave it in half, they'd put one half over here and half there. They would make their covenant, they'd walk between it, and the idea would be that if I break this covenant, you can do to me what we just did to this animal. And that is the covenant. So the people recognize that Nahash, the Ammonite, is a very strong man. He's got an army. He's a threat to them. And so they think, let's make a covenant with this guy. And Nahash, of course, he's trying to enlarge his kingdom. He's the Putin of his time. And he is working to enlarge the kingdom. And so if you enlarge the kingdom, you need to bring it into subjection, and you want to guarantee that there's not going to be any uprising against you, and you want to make it that way. And it says, on this condition I will make a covenant with you, that I may thrust out all of your right eyes and lay it for a reproach on all of Israel. If they don't have a right eye, it's going to make it really hard for them to fight ever again. And so they think, well, I'm always amazed by this way of thinking. And this way of thinking hasn't changed one bit. You know, all the people of, all the Muslims out there want to have a jihad. And the whole idea is that we are the infidels to them. And so the only way to deal with the infidels is to kill all the infidels. And their very book, the Quran or the Quran or whatever it is you want to call it now, the book tells them that this is how they should deal with infidels. Kill them all. And so our approach is, okay, well, how about you don't kill us this year? How about let's wait till next year, okay? And we think that's going to put it all off. Sorry, folks, it ain't going to work that way. And so these people say, well, give us 7 days respite that we may send messengers on all the coasts of Israel, and then if there be no man to save us, we will come out to you. And so they sent out, and he agrees to this. And you think, why would he agree to this? Well, he's feeling pretty strong. I've got a great army. I think I can beat them all. You know, and everybody who raises up that way thinks they're going to live forever and they're going to be able to conquer everything. And so his way of thinking is that if they go out there and they bring more people in, that's just that much more stuff we can steal from them. We'll take a booty. You know, we're going to lay them waste, and we'll have more goods to take back, because that's part of the way they paid the soldiers. You got to keep what you had killed for. And so he says, okay, that's agreed. You have that. And they sent out into all of it. And it comes to Gibeah, and we get down to the 5th verse, and Saul is coming up. It says, behold, Saul came after the herd out of the field, and Saul said, what aileth the people that they weep? Because the word has come to these people, and they're, oh, woe is me, what will we do? And he comes up, what's wrong with all the people? And so they tell Saul what was gone, and this is the first brave thing that Saul has done. They told him the tidings of the men of Jabesh, and the Spirit of God came upon Saul, and I think that might be the secret to this. The Spirit of God came upon Saul, and when he heard those tidings, and his anger was kindled greatly, and he took a yoke of oxen, and he hewed them in pieces, and he went and he sent them throughout the coasts of Israel, every way. Put on a horse, run these out there. And he said, whosoever cometh not forth after Saul and after Samuel, because there are a certain number of people that aren't going to come out just by the name of Saul, but they do respect Samuel. And so he puts his name in there too. If you don't come out, so shall it be done unto his oxen. And the fear of the Lord fell on the people, and they came out with one consent. And when he numbered them in Bezek, the children of Israel were 300,000, and the men of Judah 30,000. So 330,000 people showed up. And if we carry on down here, they went to battle with the Ammonites, and Saul laid them out just right. He did, everything fell together. It worked out. And they reduced them to where they were scattered, and there was not two of them that were not left together. There was nobody left. And the people said unto Samuel, now they rise up and said, who is he that said, shall Saul reign over us? Bring them in, and we will put them to death. Everybody wants to put everybody else to death for whatever it is. And it's the same today. You don't agree with me? Now let's put you to death. And again, Saul, and I'm not so certain that this isn't with the inspiration of the Holy Spirit in his life, says, there shall not a man be put to death this day, for today the Lord hath wrought salvation in Israel. Oh, we need to recognize that on an individual basis in our own lives. Because there are days like that when we recognize that God has really wrought something good. Brought it about. And there shall not a man be put to death, because the Lord hath wrought salvation in Israel. And then said Samuel to the people, come, let us go to Gilgal, and renew the kingdom there. And all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. And there they sacrificed sacrifices of peace offerings before the Lord. And there Saul and all the men. Ooh, let's go back a bit. Going up to Gilgal and making a king is not a surprise to God. And if you want to have that reinforced, you'll have to go back and look up Deuteronomy 17, verses 14 through 20 for yourself, because God foretells all of this several hundred years before it even came about. And the people, according to their custom, has been to reject God. And we're not any different than they were in that day. They rejected the invisible God to fashion ones for themselves that they could see. We reject the immortal God to make ones that crumble and decay with time, and we find them in the layers of the dirt. They reject the omnipotent God for that which is powerless to satisfy and to save. And we reject Jehovah Jireh, and we ask the government to provide. But because of this failure of a king, Saul, he was a total failure. But because of him, God has set in motion something that will produce the King of Kings. We always have to keep our eye on the end, because there's a lot of bad stuff that happens in between. And as we start to march into the land of the kings and the weaknesses and the failures of them, keep your eye on the King of Kings, who is to come from their standpoint, who has come from our standpoint. And so we need to be like Samuel and Saul and all the people of Israel. In this last verse, it says, all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. Rejoice. Rejoice. For we are indentured to the King of Kings.